welcome back to Ready Nerd Go. This is a show where someone who knows nothing about tabletop RPGs, me, is joined by someone who does know something about tabletop RPGs, Anko,
Me.
and then we just start talking about things. Now, we have a theme generally per episode. We're going to try and talk about pre-gaming. Anko has very kindly set out a rough set of guidelines that we're going to try and follow. And we're going to go from there. So I think we're going to start with the difference of no gaming versus okay gaming versus bad gaming. We're going to delve a bit more into what a session zero is, safety tools, geek social fallacies, which I'm really interested to hear what you have to say on that. And then we're going to go with red flags and finally wrap it up. Again, folks, at some point we might have timestamps in these as we start to get more into a flow. It hasn't happened. It didn't happen last episode. It's probably not going to happen this episode. It might be a thing in the future. Anko, how the hell are you doing?
Oh, pretty good. It's been a hectic weekend, but I'm glad to be sitting down and getting back to it. And just because I know you're going to remember in like half an hour, I'm just going to beat you to the punch here on this one. For those who don't know, my lovely host here is Alex, because he forgot to introduce himself. How have you
You're
been,
right.
Alex?
So the irony here is that in my efforts to try and keep the show sounding somewhat put together, I did the intro 3 times, and the third time I forgot to introduce myself. It is what it is.
Yep.
Yeah, not too bad, not too bad. Um, so no gaming, okay gaming, and bad gaming. We
Yeah.
touched on this a bit last episode, but obviously we want to go a bit more into it.
Yeah, because it's, like I mentioned in the last episode, it's something that you hear bandied about a lot, usually when people talk about issues with whatever group they're currently playing with, that, no gaming is better than bad gaming. And I kind of wanted to come back around and touch on that again because it's ultimately an ultimatum, and most ultimatums are functionally useless in the real world. And it's a lot more accurate to say that, no gaming is better than bad gaming, but okay gaming is also better than no gaming because you'll find people in discussions online who will be talking about like oh, this one thing that my group does upsets me, should I leave over it? And it's like, well, that's, is it bothering you enough that it's making it bad gaming, or is it bothering you just that it's like, oh, this is a quirk I'm not overly fond of?
To
And so I
me,
did want to come
yeah,
back in and
no,
touch on that one.
I think that's worth touching on because as someone who has really only had an experience with two different groups, and I'm going to be completely upfront. I don't have an experience of bad gaming. I have an experience where I didn't know what I was doing and I
Hmm.
was too self-conscious, so I ended up being like I was removed from the group as opposed to wanting to leave. But I also
Ah.
recognized that me leaving was the right call because I just couldn't commit the time this is way back when I couldn't commit the time and I understood that. And so when I was showing up to every other week at best, I get it, right? Like it's a weekly
Yep.
thing, and it was one game that they were playing. It wasn't like what we do, where you can play a different game every other week. So it's not a big deal if someone misses an episode, misses a session. I was missing every other session at best, or at work, no, at best. And so when they said, "Hey, I don't think this is working out," I said, "You know what? I agree. It's not like it's not fair for you to have to deal with me not being there." And they're like, "No hard feelings." I'm like, "Oh, absolutely not." Like
Yeah.
one of the guys or the DM. We still chat daily. Like he's still a really good friend of mine. So I there's absolutely no hard feelings there. And I think that we were able to recognize that for me, I was the bad gamer in the session in the group, and that's fine. Like it's absolutely fine. It's not a to me for us that wasn't a big deal. We were able to deal with it like adults and have that conversation. Whereas I think what you had touched on with the someone sniffs before every turn, should I quit my group? Is
Yeah, because like it's generally you get two kinds of groups that come together when people start playing an RPG. You'll get either the group of friends who one of them says, "Hey guys, I really want to do this. Will you do it with me?" And then they get together and play, and that generally doesn't end up bad gaming very often, just because like you already know each other, you already know each other's personality quirks. Presumably, if you're a friend group that's hanging out together, you already like each other. Like
be
it
really
can,
awkward if you weren't.
right? it, it can turn into bad gaming when you have incompatible play styles. Because like for example, like I tend to prefer a more well what I'm in the mood for. I tend to prefer a more like role play heavy style as opposed to some people who prefer the more like mechanical style of it. Both are fine, but if you get into a group that has a drastically different style than you do, like if you get a group that all they want to do is, dungeon delve and kill monsters and loot and repeat, and you want to, focus on romancing this NPC your character met in the tavern and like expanding on the political intrigue in the town, it's going to be bad gaming for you because the style of game that you want to play and what game you want to play is just fundamentally incompatible with what the group offers. But a lot more often what you'll get with, and I can just be very upfront on this one, like the our weekly game is not really my style of gaming. The group is like twice as large as I normally enjoy playing with, and we just, because of the size of the group and the limited time slot we have, it tends to be very role play light just because we don't have the time to get in depth with role playing. But it's not bad gaming for me. It's still better than no gaming, and it just being consistent is fantastic, and I do still enjoy myself. So
It,
that's not bad gaming. I wouldn't necessarily call it my ideal, but it's not bad gaming.
no, I understand where you're coming from with that. I think that the more I've watched you play, and again, folks, if this is your first time, the reason I say watched Anko play is I work at a comic shop. Anko's group would play in front of me for 2 to 4 hours a night, and somehow I got roped in to play to joining a game, and now I just oh, you need a character for this game, like okay. So it's one of those things where the group gets larger because people like me just happen to hang around and join in, and they're a great group that want to be inclusive, and I'm happy to join. I'm also happy to acknowledge that hey, if the group's too big for this one, I don't you don't need a character for me for every single thing.
And that's actually something we're going to touch on later when we get to the social fallacies part of this. So look
Oh,
forward to that one.
interesting. So I was reading about a story where, and I'm going to paraphrase it and butcher it, and no one's really
Hmm.
going to be able to judge me for it because you may not know the story I'm talking about. There was a group who had joined, or some folks who had joined a table at a game store. So I assume that the DM was either provided by the game store or was a DM who would go there and run a group for whomever wanted to show up with. All of these things can happen. And ended up making a pass at one of the players who politely declined. And then the next session, after the DM had stalked the player on social media, had a NPC show up who was described as being very much like the player's partner, and then proceeded to make that NPC as dumb and all of the negative things about him possible, and essentially ruin the game. And when called on it, he's like, "Well, if I'm not going to have a chance, I may as well say what I wanted to say." And I'm like, you're a fucking asshole.
Yeah, I haven't had that exact scenario, but I've definitely had similar scenarios come up in my gaming before, and that's just something again that we'll be touching on a bit later with social fallacies. Like it's not so much nowadays, but like especially when we were growing up, playing tabletop RPGs was predominantly the field of, the introvert nerds with no social skills. And I say that as one of the people that was an introvert nerd with no social skills.
I'm not going to judge in any way, shape, or form. I think the only reason I didn't play tabletop RPGs growing up is because I didn't know about them.
Yeah. And like, it's when you get people who have not really well developed social skills into tabletop RPG, it's like, yeah, it is a game, but it is also a very social game where most of what you're doing is directly interacting and working with the other people at the table. So if you have poor social skills in one way or another, like, I'm not saying people who don't have good social skills can't play. God knows a lot of my friends have learned social skills through playing because you have to if
You
you
don't
want to
have a choice.
stay
Yeah.
around. But it's just like, yeah, it's like you will definitely get all sorts, and sometimes the people who are a little lacking in that department can cause bad gaming for everybody else, especially when they're the GM.
Yeah. And I think I forgot what I was going to say. That happens. I think
That's all right.
when it comes down to it, it's very much a case of yes, there is, is no gaming better than bad gaming? Yes, arguably so, because you're not getting a bad experience that's going to taint you from future or being willing to reach out and try tabletop RPGs again, either in person or online.
Yeah.
However, I think that there's also something to be said about when it comes to either okay gaming versus bad gaming. The okay gaming, like you said, it may not be your ideal, but if there's nothing inherently wrong or offensive or off-putting about the players themselves, and they're doing their best to welcome you to the sessions, and yet for some reason something's not clicking. Like you mentioned that you would rather an RP heavy style, a roleplay heavy style versus more of a direct dungeon crawling combat style. And
Mm,
if that's where someone is finding a disconnect, that's fine. Like it's fine to step away. If someone can't commit to being at the session as often as they need to be, again, it's fine to have the conversation to remove them because they're probably already well aware that they're not able to commit as much and they're waiting for that conversation to happen.
yeah, and something like
I was.
it's it is an ongoing joke in pretty much any RPG focused subreddit or forum or Discord or what have you, that 99% of the questions that people will bring to the media saying, hey, how do I solve this problem? How do I, deal with this player or that GM, is like, have you tried talking to them?
It's so true. I the amount of times that issues that you had with people, like in game or not, can be
Yeah.
solved by having a conversation where you're able to take a breath. And I use the expression approach it like an adult, but what I mean is you approach it trying to be calm. You
Yeah.
approach it wanting a resolution one way or another, whilst
No,
also
and
acknowledging that, hey, sometimes the resolution is that we say, you know what, this isn't working. We need to end whatever this is. However, that doesn't mean I think you're a shit person. I just don't think you're a fit for what we're doing.
exactly. And something that actually relates both to the story that you brought up earlier about the GM putting the player's partner in, is that one of the very common solutions that people try, which is almost guaranteed to be the wrong solution, is that when a lot of the times when people have interpersonal issue with the group for whatever reason, they will try to solve it in the game. Like, oh, this player is just murder hoboing everybody. How do I stop them from doing it? And then people will say, oh, well, you try doing this to their character, like make this happen to them in game. It's like, no, the problem isn't with their character. The problem is with their player. And like for like, that GM in your example, like, the proper thing, if he had something to say, would have been to say it outside of the game, but instead he drug his real world problems into the game and made it uncomfortable for everybody.
And that's just it. Like there's there's always a way to address things, and I think it, like you said, it does go back to what you were saying with establishing, almost as if to say that if only there was a way, Anko, to establish what kind of game people are expecting.
Beautiful segue, sir.
It was good. I was working on that for a while.
So I want to say it's a relatively modern invention to codify it, but I say that it's got to be at least a decade old at this point. I'm just getting old. But
No, I think that saying a relatively modern thing for something that may be 10 years old in relation to a game that's 40 years old,
you know,
it's still only
D
maybe like,
Dungeons and Dragons, I think, just had its 50th anniversary, I think last year.
okay, so that
So
that just underlines the point I was poorly trying to make.
yeah, but yeah, so one of the most commonly accepted solutions in the industry as a whole right now, in the hobby as a whole, is having a session zero. I know we briefly talked about it last episode, but it's like, to just a quick recap on it, it's like having a session zero is something that you get your potential players together, your potential GM together. You all sit down, either whether it's preferably in person, just because that's how I prefer, but a lot of people play online. So, like, you get the group together in whatever format your group is getting together in, and you guys just go over. It's like, okay, like, what kind of game are we looking to play? What do people really want to have in the game? What do people not want to have in the game? And like, what style of game are we playing? It is hashing out all that stuff beforehand, just so people have a good expectation of what they're looking for. Because like, if people want, if like most of the group wants to play like an authentic Western setting, for instance, then the guy that wants to play knight in shining armor, his character isn't going to be appropriate to the type of game that the rest of the players want to play. And it's a lot better to find that out in session zero than it is to find out session one, whenever he rocks up ready to play, and he plops down his Sir Lancelot.
In the middle of the Wild West. And I think
Exactly.
I've also read about some GMs will have a more casual approach to loot management, resting, character exhaustion, things like that, and others will have an almost survival horror where anything can happen, and if you don't set a picket at night or have someone on watch at night, then the GM will roll something. Say, oh hey, there's no watch. Someone roll an observation check. We're going to find out if you're going to get attacked tonight. So again, I think that's something that, to your point, establishing that from the GM's perspective as to what kind of game they're going to run, regardless of the setting and the necessary characters, is also worth doing. And that's something that I had never thought about until I just happened to come across it in a subreddit. Ironically enough, I did a bit of research, not specific to the topics you wanted to bring up, but I just happened to start reading about certain things online.
Yeah, it was kind of funny. I remember when Session Zero really started becoming popular, like as a concept online. And you always have the people who are like, oh, we don't need a Session Zero. Why would you need that? Session Zero is there for babies. Da 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 da. And it's Session Zeros aren't necessary. They're extraordinarily helpful. And even with our group at Comic Hunter, like, we don't do full Session Zeros at Comic Hunter, just because, quite frankly, we don't have the time. But it's just, we will have we'll like sit down for like 10-20 minutes at the end of one session and just talk about, like, okay, so what do people want to play next? And then we'll have like a quick 20-minute hash out. And because we've all played together so long, we know the general vibes of what people are looking for, and we can just get that done and go. So our session zeros can be really short, because generally we're playing the same general style most of the time. We're just hashing out the quick details, then we can come back ready to play. But if you're starting a brand new group for the first time with a bunch of strangers, you have no idea what anybody wants out of it, and you really need that session zero to really be able to get into it. Like good GMs online will have, when they're like recruiting, they'll have a document up that's like, hey, this is generally my play style. If you're interested in this, apply for it. So that helps. But the session zero is needed for online, especially.
I, as someone who really hasn't played much, the session zero that worked that for with the group that the session zero with the group at the Comic Hunter makes sense to me purely because I know that if I have questions, not a single one of you is going to be upset with me asking.
Yeah.
Right? Every single one in the group is like, hey, can I, or I'll even ask on my turn, can I do this? Yeah, sure, why not? Okay, great. If I have other questions, they generally get answered. I've also deliberately taken to playing really dumb characters, mostly because I'm also working and don't want to I don't really shouldn't have the mental ability to focus on the game 100%. So it's easy to play a character that doesn't really know what's going on because I don't really know what's going on. But in a session zero, I feel like that's something that if you don't know the group, you're able to explain and say, "Hey, I'm going to be a dumb person because I don't know what's going on,"
Yeah. And like,
and that's perfectly fine.
do you know what the term social contract means?
I, in relation to tabletop RPGs, I can make a guess, but I wouldn't be able to probably give you a
No,
clear definition.
it's not explicitly for table RPG specifically. Just it comes up a lot when people are discussing session zero, especially because like like everybody has a there's a social contract for pretty much like anything you do with other people. Just most of the time it's implicit. Like, when you go to the theaters and, you don't need to be told not to talk at the theater. It's the implied social contract that you're out in public watching the movie. You're going to be quiet so other people can enjoy the movie.
Right.
But like for stuff like, in like when you're playing with a group of people that you already know, you already have that social contract in place, even if you've never used the words or ever actually explicitly talked about it, just because you guys know what is socially acceptable within your group. But when you're playing with like a new group or you're playing online, that's also part of where the session zero comes in, is it's not just about the game. It can also be about, the social contract involved, where, where you can talk about the things like, hey, like, once one thing that comes up really in common is like, hey, I don't want to hear any like hate speech at the table. Like, that is definitely not okay at my table. That will get you removed. And unfortunately, in the current political climate, that's something you need to be explicit about. But like,
Yeah.
it's
I
like that
have
is
I
that.
have thoughts, and I know they align to you, but I won't interrupt you with that rant.
Yeah. But like, like that is, having that having that social contract up front makes it a lot easier to make sure that you're playing with people that, you are actually going to be able to tolerate being around. It's
Whoever
like,
would have thought that playing a game of it's a social game, you almost need to make sure you're going to be able to at least tolerate the people you're playing with.
astonishing, right?
It's absolutely baffling to me.
And like one of the other things that get used a lot in games, I use these for, well, a variant of them. I use them for new games with when I'm teaching players. Doesn't really come up with our group, just because, as before, our social contract is pretty well defined at this point as to what people will and won't tolerate. But safety tools are pretty much codifying what we were just talking about, like things you're willing to tolerate in the game and out of the game, but more in the sense of like safety. Like that would be stuff where you would bring up, like, one that comes up, that's like the example, is whether or not you're okay with like rape happening in the fiction of the game. Because for some groups, especially people who play like more like old school styles, or like horror fiction or something where that can be a trope of the fiction, they're okay with that coming up in the fiction of the game, while other people, they don't care that they're playing, medieval peasants. They don't want to even think about that coming up, and that should just not come up. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think that's very fair. Like, it seems to be that's the sort of thing that I wouldn't have thought about until it comes up, and then at that point,
Yeah.
how would you address it if you've had a session zero, you have gone through the safety tools. So, for example, like you've got parentheses here in the guideline that we have. So you've got you've gone through what you do and don't want to come up or have happen. But if something wasn't addressed in session zero, how do you approach that?
So there's a few different tools that have been floated around the internet right now, and to be clear, most of these tools are mostly helpful for people who need the structure to be able to object to something in their group. Like if something came up in our group that somebody was just flat out not okay with, pretty much everybody in our group is comfortable enough with who they're playing with to just say, hey guys, I don't want to deal with this. Can we change it or skip past it or what have you? And then the group would change it and move on. These kind of tools are really helpful for people who either don't have the confidence to speak up like that, which is very common, or they need the structure to be able to feel comfortable and not worry about that stuff coming up. So like one of the two of the most common ones that I've heard of anyway are lines and veils and the X card. I don't use well, I kind of use lines and veils for when I'm running for a new group. I don't use the X card in my game, so I may describe it a little off from how the quote unquote proper way to use it is. But lines and veils are pretty much at the start in your session zero. You have you'll have two columns that players can add things to. Your lines and your veils, and your veils are pretty much things that you're okay with coming up in the game, but you don't want to go into detail with. The or example there would be sex. Like you can say, like, yeah, I'm okay with, if you have the veil of sex in your session zero, it can be like, yeah, I'm okay with Bob seducing the barmaid and taking her to bed, but it's that's what's said at the table. Like, he takes her to bed, fade to black. You don't touch on that part anymore. You don't get into detail about what's behind the veil, quote unquote.
Right. Yeah, makes sense.
While a line, on the other hand, is something that you don't want to see at all. So, like, if you had the line of sex for your group, then it's not mentioned. It's not brought up. It's not touched on. Just that is not something that comes up in the fiction of your game.
That makes sense. And it's you would think that that would be something that the majority of people would be happy to respect, but I get the feeling that you have a story where it isn't.
Oh, thankfully, I haven't had any personal examples of that. I've had some that have come close,
Yeah,
but
and again, like I'm not
I've
trying to
definitely
dig
plenty
I'm
of
not
horror
trying to dig for
stories. Oh yeah,
information. Yeah, I'm
no,
not trying to dig for information. So I'm not.
no.
It's just the way you were saying. Is like I'm curious to see if that was something that you have actually dealt
No,
with.
the issue that I do have with lines and veils, and it's not an issue with the system itself, it's a shortcoming of trying to use it, is that you need to be able to be upfront about these things. And there's the two big problems of that, is that one, people don't necessarily know what's going to set them off until it happens. And so, if say, like, say you're arachnophobic and just didn't think about that at all, and then one session the GM starts to get into this really gnarly description of this giant monstrosity spider descending on the group, that might set you off, but you just didn't think about that in session zero, because when you're thinking about high fantasy, you're not necessarily thinking about spiders.
Ironically, though, you've got Shayla. However, I
Oh yeah,
understand.
no.
No, but I understand your point. I was just trying to be a smartass. It's it, you're right though. That there's definitely something that, and as you said, it can be as innocent as a giant spider. One of my friends is horrifically arachnophobic, to the point where we were talking the other day, and I looked and I said, "Oh, there's a spider crawling across my wall," and he said, and he freaked out because I said the spider is at my place.
Yeah,
He
no,
then freaked out even more when I said I'm not really going to bother doing anything because the spider's not doing anything to anyone.
like phobias are called phobias for a reason.
Exactly. Like, I'm not you, and you know I never judge someone for a phobia. Just as
No.
so if you're running a game and someone's like, oh guys, that's a bit too much. I'm okay, cool, no worries. I'll just acknowledge it's a giant spider coming down at you, and I won't describe any more than that.
Yeah, and then like if it was something that was really going to be a problem for them, it's and people getting real big fights with this one, but it's like you can just change the fiction if you need to. Like say, oh, it's no longer a giant spider. It's you're fine with millipedes. Cool, it's a giant millipede coming down.
I'd
Because
love
it's
I'd love to know the person who's not okay with spiders but is fine with a millipede. Because I've always assumed arachnophobia is to do with their legs.
you can add more legs. It's fine, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Or like a scorpion or something. So,
Yeah.
um, but yeah,
But no,
no. So
and the other thing I just want to touch on with lines and veils, the other issue that I run into it with it very frequently. I still think it's a valuable tool, but the other issue you run into very frequently is it's like it's like part of the reason you have this tool is because people might not be comfortable bringing up the issues they have mid game, but they also might not be comfortable bringing up the issues they have before the game either. Like to continue with the arachnophobic example, if you could have a player who knows they're arachnophobic and knows they don't want to deal with it, but they also want to be a team player and don't want to bother people, so they just won't mention it and hope it doesn't come up because they don't want to disrupt the group or something. And it can be really hard to get people that is like no, if obviously I can only say this about my group. There's definitely groups that you can't trust them on that, but it's like nobody's going to judge you here.
no,
You can be honest about what's going to bother you, but especially when you're playing with a new group of people online, that kind of trust just doesn't exist yet.
and the thing is, we've all experienced in our lives that people are not always great to each other, and if you're in an online group and you don't really know each other, and you said, "Hey, I'm severely arachnophobic," and for whatever reason you've annoyed the person to your left, and they're like, "You know what? I'm fucking sick of this. My character pulls out a giant spider as a pet."
Exactly.
Well, like most people wouldn't do that, but it's always a risk.
And I can. There's been plenty of stories about stuff like that happening. Because, like I said, a lot of people who, especially my age when we started playing, didn't exactly have the greatest of social graces.
Is
But
this so? I wanted to ask about the X card. So you got that written
yes,
down too. I think that was. I don't know if you touched on it explicitly in the same way you did with lines and veils.
no. So, and actually, you kind of leaned into it when you were asking, if there was a way to, bring it up in game if you had forgotten about it, and that's kind of what the X card is there for. Because the concept of the X card is obviously this is more something that's better for like convention play where you literally don't know anybody and you don't have time to spend like an hour or two on session zero to map everything out for people. The X card is pretty much just it's a card sitting close enough for anybody to reach, or if you need multiples or what have you, but it's a card that that any player can touch at any time, and if they do, that's just a signal for the GM to skip over whatever's currently happening. It's The idea is that, as I understand it, the idea is that it's just a flat out skip, so the player doesn't need to like into why they're being bothered or like explain themselves or anything like that in case like it's traumatic or triggering or what have you. Personally, that's also the issue that I have with the X card because like as the GM, if I'm using this tool and we're like in the middle of a scene or something and a player touches their X card, I don't necessarily know why they're doing it. And if I don't know why they're doing it, then I don't know what in the fiction needs to be skipped over or changed.
Yeah, so it's not so much that it's a bad idea. It's that it's almost too anonymous or too, hey, this is bothering me. Okay, well, what's bothering you? Well, I don't want to talk about it.
Yeah, like
I
that's
can see why that would be a very, not game breaking in a way, but a very difficult thing to deal with. Is that if I don't know what's bothering you, I don't know how to fix it, or I don't know how to what to avoid
and
either.
like I very much understand will exist, especially for people who want to play but have like social anxiety or something like that, and they literally can't express themselves like that. It's understandable why it exists. I don't personally use it in my games, but that's also because like I don't really play with strangers very often. Even when I'm teaching new players, they're generally friends or family that we're already on a pretty good rapport with. A
Which
similar system, which ironically I'm 95% positive comes from the kink community, is the red light, yellow light, which is just, as pretty much what it sounds like. If a player, either says yellow light or hits whatever their yellow light signifier is, it's like, okay, we don't need to stop the game, but we need to like slow down, check in, make sure everything's okay, then we can keep playing. But if you red light, then it's like, okay, something like immediately needs to be stopped, the game needs to be paused so we can check
we
in.
can, yeah, and again, I think that also boils back to the, like we said, that if you're comfortable in a group, then you can have those conversations, and even if you don't know it's going to bother you until it comes up, if you're comfortable with everyone in the group and you can have the conversation in that moment, great, fantastic, move on. But as you said, it's not always the case if it's a group of strangers that you're playing with.
Yeah, like most of these safety tools, as I understand it, are pretty much designed for convention play, which I'm only now realizing after having said it like 5 times. I should explain what convention play is.
It's funny. So you said it, and I was like, oh, I assume that's when you have a game at a convention and there's like a pre-drawn up character sheet and it's like a 4 or 5 hour adventure.
Yeah, that's
But then I
that's
never
pretty
asked
much
you about it.
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, that's pretty much exactly what it is. Like, you'll have, you know, there's numerous RPG conventions that happen across the globe, and like convention play is, GMs will either sign up or get hired on to run just a one-off adventure in whatever system they happen to be running for, and then people will sign up and either bring their own characters to it, or they will play pre-made characters that already exist for it. And it's just you're together for like 3 to 5 hours, whatever the time slot is, and it's just sit down and go. And for stuff like that, these tools can be really helpful because you don't have the time to get to know people or have a real session zero to go over all of your lines and veils or anything like that. You can just say, hey,
This isn't for me. Like
we
this, there's
have,
something here
if
that's
you have
bothered.
an
Yeah,
issue, hit this.
yeah. And I think that makes a lot of sense when you put it in that context. I think that if there's an issue you're having in the middle of a game, it's probably a lot easier to say, "Hey guys, can we take a break?" In theory. However, I feel like the next subject we have might throw a bit of shade on that because it's geek social fallacies, and this is one that I'm interested in
Yeah, so
purely
this is
just
something this is something that came like, honestly, I'm not even sure with how much more popular things have gotten, how relevant these are to modern play anymore, but they're just fun to talk about. But like this,
let's be honest. This kind of thing, I again, I'm with no real indication as to where the topic's going to go. It is the sort of thing that I think an outsider who hasn't played D&D or tabletop RPGs, who really isn't immersed in the culture at all. I would consider myself, if not not a regular tabletop RPG player, but at the very least, I'm aware of some of the culture around it, purely just from being a comic fan and being a nerd in
yeah,
different spheres.
like it's
Someone who
they're not really they're not
isn't,
really like RPG specific so much as they're like nerd culture in general tends to suffer from these, because like we have like, because like I mentioned, like I don't know too much about your background, but like growing up, being into the more geeky stuff was very much, Vetterboten. Like nobody, no, none of the popular people were into like video games or RPGs or comics or any of that kind of stuff. That was all like the nerd loser stuff.
It's
And
so
so like we would we would stick together with the people who like who had our interests regardless of honestly how much we actually liked them, which is where a lot of these geeks social fallacies come from. Because like we have like like the obvious one like that comes up that you vaguely alluded to before, where it's like oh like I know you're scared of spiders. Here, have a spider.
yeah, it's
Is it comes up, or it's like nobody would ever get rid of the spider guy because like he's just having fun, and like he's one of us, and you can't just kick out one of us because we have to stick together, and
there's not
regardless
many of
of
us. We don't want to get rid of one of us, despite the fact that he keeps having a spider at every table that we play at. Um,
exactly.
yeah, I grew up in a place where I was the only comics person that I knew, and yet,
Mm,
despite that, like I just didn't really talk about comics. I was, as I'm sure you're aware, very much into heavy metal, that kind of thing.
mm-hmm.
And so that part of my personality was more prevalent than anything else. I didn't know anyone that played D&D, although in hindsight, looking back, I can pinpoint two people that I'm positive played D&D or were into that kind of thing. In like one of the guys was great, and I got on with both of them. But we just never hung out, so it never came up to the fact that they're like, "Oh, you know do you want to play?" And I'd have been like, "Sure, why not? Let's give it a shot." So it never came up. I didn't really know about it. It was just one of those things. Um, yeah, so I never really had the spider guy in our friend group. I had idiots in my friend group, but no one that would throw the spider at you, so to speak. Well, no,
Oh,
that's not true. That's not true.
I have definitely had at least one spider guy in my friend group growing up, but we were the outcasts, and the outcasts had to stick together no matter what, even if one of them is just an incredibly toxic person. And like
Yeah,
that's
it's hey, you need in high school and such, you need the numbers in your group so that you're not necessarily alone, right? Which
yeah.
is another topic in and of itself, and also like I don't mean to skip over that, but
No.
yeah, so when other than the spider guy, I feel like we were gonna after a while we're gonna have these conversations. Oh, so if you remember the spider guy,
That's how we build up our lore.
exactly.
Yeah, like another really common one, which I know you will understand, is it's very difficult to and this is kind of in a similar, like these are all kind of in a similar vein of the general concept that we've already gone over. But another one that comes up very commonly is that whenever somebody in the group is just like the very easy example here is like poor hygiene. Poor hygiene comes up a lot in this hobby, or at least it did when
It
we were getting into it. Presumably, it's less common nowadays.
the thing is with that, I find it's very much a basement dwelling nerd stereotype. And yeah, absolutely, like you run into people where it's an issue, and yet at the same time, it's not nowhere near as big of an issue as I was expecting.
No.
However, I recall walking into a comic shop in in Maine somewhere. South, it was near Portland, but it wasn't Portland. And in the interests of not derailing the show, I'm not going to try and remember where it was. But my wife and I had walked in, and I had walked in, and now I don't have much of a sense of smell for various reasons. Like as a kid, I had horrific allergies. I was on prescription strength allergy pills, and they didn't do shit. Or
Jesus.
they did do shit, but people that would look at me would assume that I wasn't on anything. I was on
Yeah.
prescription strength, and I think that just helped derail my sense of smell. In conjunction with the fact I had nosebleeds almost nightly as a kid, which probably wrecked the rest of my ability to smell. So when I eat spicy food and I like spicy food, it's because for the most part that's one of the few things I can reliably taste. This is
That makes
important
sense.
because as I walked into this shop, I was like, oh, that's not great, but whatever. So I just carried on and was looking for certain comics. My wife walks in after having a look at an antique shop and just taking pictures in the street. She walks in, she looks around, she's like, I'm leaving because it smells like cat piss and desperation. And I was like, oh God.
Yep.
I was like, all right. So she turned around and left, and I picked up the couple of comics that I was looking for. And ironically enough, I found one for $4 that was worth at least 100. That was worth at the time was probably worth closer to 100 or more. So I
Wow.
was happy. I don't think it's worth that anymore, but I was happy, and I got it for $4. And then I left,
Right.
and she said, I realized there were cats in there. And she said, I think what it was is that the litter box probably needed to be cleaned, was probably close to an air vent, so it was just circulating a smell. She said, and then there was also the guys playing Magic, and she said that didn't help. So it's one of those things where the unfortunate thing, or the unfortunate fact, is that a lot of nerd related hobbies have the reputation that the people playing them are all in need of some kind of
Yeah, and
shower, basically.
it's it's the type of thing where it's always the problem of in this where it kind of comes into the geek social fallacy of it, is that it is like even back when I was a kid getting into this stuff, it would only be like one out of every like 10, 20 guys that would be like this.
Yeah,
But when there's 10 of you in the room and one of you hasn't showered in 2 weeks, you all reek.
it's
And
so
just like,
I don't
and
know
nobody
if I
want
ever
it.
told you. Um,
Oh, go on.
this is actually not in no relation to RPG gaming, but it's a testament to the nature of smells. My neighbor was in out of the country, and we had to look after two of her cats. We didn't realize, and neither did they, that one of them was pregnant.
Ooh.
Neither one of them were fixed, and we don't know. I don't know to this day if they were the the two cats had mated or if they were gotten out and one of the toms outside had done the deed. Either
Mm.
way, at that point we had to shut the windows, and because we then had to separate the female with the litter from the male cat who was nervous, he sprayed fucking everywhere for like weeks on end. It got to
Oh
the
God.
point where I would go into the house and leave and would only sit on one chair, and my wife's like, you need to go put your clothing in the laundry. So after that happened twice, I then had a neighbor outfit that I would wear twice, like, and I would have to wash it daily. And it
Yep.
would very much be a case of I'd go in, take care of the animals, leave, and I'd still end up walking out with that ammonia smell to me. Like if any of you have cats, you're gonna know what smell I mean. And if you don't have cats, then there's no way to describe what an unneutered male's urine smells like. It's just nose.
Potent.
It's yeah, potent. So it to your point, 9 out of 10 of you might be absolutely clean, etc. One of you may not be, and it's rough.
Yeah,
Now,
and it's yeah. Sorry,
yeah,
keep going.
no, I was going to transition to red flags, but I think we've touched on some of these in terms of the individual, the people behave, not behavior so much, but the what to do in terms of setting up the game so that you're able to feel comfortable playing. But I feel like with you having separated red flags out from everything else, there's more to this than just what we've already talked about.
Yeah, so this is also part of the reason why I put red flags at the end, because red flags was originally like the general pitch for this episode, and then I was thinking about it. It's like, yeah, it's all of these separate categories that kind of bleeds into red flags, and I wanted to touch on those individually. because it's like red flag. It's kind of funny when people are talking. Oh no, what red flags should I look out for? It's like, well, most of the obvious red flags that you need to look out for are the red flags that you would need to look out for in like any social situation. And going over those in the context of an RPG seems kind of excessive
Redundant.
because like you should yeah you should already know. It's like, hey, like if you know if the guy is a complete douchebag, that's a red flag. Don't play with him. If he has Nazi tattoos, don't play with him. Like it's some of these
In
should be really obvious.
I think no, you're absolutely right. If it's a red flag that you wouldn't play with that person, or so you wouldn't hang out with that person in general, probably going to be a red flag in in the game. Now, I don't mean that if I was going to join a group and one of the people playing was a like I'm ironically enough, I actually registered for the Liberal Party so I could vote for Mark Carney when that comes around
Mm-hmm.
in later this month. I mean, in Canada. However, I'm not going to not have a conversation with someone who is considering voting for Pierre Polyev.
Yeah.
I'm, that's not like that isn't enough of a red flag for me to cut someone off.
No. Like
However,
yeah.
if
I do
it,
have I do have friends from across the political
yeah,
spectrum, and yeah, there are definitely there's too far, and you don't associate with this person,
mhm.
but there's also like so yeah, we disagree, and I understand why you have your viewpoints. I disagree with them, but I'm not going to drop you over that specific issue. There is
No,
definitely issues
exactly.
you
Like
should
for the
drop people over, but that's
absolutely. And one of my friends is a great guy, and I like he's absolutely fantastic. We have differing political views in some instances, and you know what? It is what it is.
yeah,
I'm not gonna not talk to them anymore because we're not gonna vote the same way. Like that's not conducive to anyone's benefit. So that said, if one of my friends came and said, "Hey, look at my brand new tattoo of Elon Musk doing a Nazi salute," I'm like, you know, the line work is good. However, I think this is the last time we probably need to talk to each other because I vehemently disagree with all of that.
exactly. And like so it's not really necessary to touch on that kind of red flag, although once again, a lot of people in the nerd sphere tend to be socially awkward and not as socially adept as, quote unquote, the popular things. So, like, sometimes people need to have the obvious discussion of, yes, if this person constantly talks down to you, that's a red flag and you should walk away because some people just, for whatever reason,
Need
haven't
to
really
feel
internalized
superior.
that and they need to be told it.
Yeah, and I think that's unfortunately true in many cases, but especially when you're new to D&D or new to tabletop RPGs, maybe you're thinking, "Oh, I'm still new. Like maybe I don't know what I'm doing." Well, that's
Yeah,
fine. But if you and maybe the person is just tired, they've had a shit day, and they don't want to have to deal with helping someone learn. It fine, whatever. But if it's a consistent thing, that's when the red flag should start to wave.
exactly. And like it's kind of an interesting thing inside the sphere of tabletop RPGs where like you can your red flags might not be my red flags specifically for gaming just because it's less, oh, this isn't a person I want to be around so much as it is, oh, this game is really not for me. Like, if you're looking for like a deeply like political game where you're wheeling and dealing with the nobleman and the game is advertised as a dungeon crawl, that could be a red flag for you because it's just like, oh, this is a very clear sign that I will not have fun doing this.
This is not for me. I
Yeah.
remember, so I used to play a lot of, as we said last time, I would play a lot of play by post sort of thing. And I joined
Mm.
a game where I had thought it was meant to be in the high Middle Ages. I had thought there would be more in the weeds kind of playing,
Yeah.
and it turned out that it was a lot more higher level. So I ended up writing a semi decent story by myself because no one felt like joining in. And then I realized that if I'm doing this, I might as well just write a fucking book. Like if I'm playing by myself as a medieval, there was a warrior retired turned to farmer, as that, then shit, I may as well write the book about it because it's not like anyone else is wanting to join in because they're more interested in the political intrigue of being a king or a queen or a prince, and that's fine. The people that were running the game are great. It just wasn't what I was looking for, and clearly it was what they were expecting wasn't what they had clearly communicated to me, or maybe I misunderstood. Like there was no fault on the game, the people running the game in any way, shape, or form. It's just there was definitely something a miscommunication somewhere, or maybe even my expectations weren't aligning to what they had. Hey, this is how we're going to play. Okay, cool. Ah, they don't mean that. You
Yeah.
know,
And like
in
so
there's a I was gonna say there's
there's no, go.
I would say there's a phrase that is often used to describe something negatively, where hey, if someone's shown you who they are, believe them.
Exactly.
Whereas in this case, if someone is saying, hey, this is how the game's going to go, believe them because that's probably how the game's going to go. And if it's not attractive to you in that moment, that's okay.
Exactly. And like for in the thought process of the theoretical target audience here, I'm more looking at like less player red flags, like red flags the GM should be worried about, and more like GM red flags that like a player looking to join a group should be worried about. Mostly just because, like, even just looking at it, you'll have one GM for every 3 to 7 players. So statistically, more players are going to need this advice than GMs are.
This is valid. This
But
is entirely valid.
yeah, but like the like one that you had kind of touched on earlier with the GM example that you had brought up earlier, like anybody, like this is for example like players in general, if you're playing with somebody who, like, if you've defined no, I don't want to see this, and no, this is not for me, and they do it anyway, massive red flag.
Oh,
Obviously, like if you tell the GM, oh, I'm arachnophobic and I can't handle spiders, I don't want to see spiders in the game, in the very first session you guys get attacked by giant spiders, that's not really oh, I just need to talk to him about it. It's like, no, that's your GM is a dick bag. Find someone else to play with.
and that's a very clear. If they're doing this in the first session, it's not going to get better. Get out while you can, or get out
Exactly.
before you're too committed. Because at the end of the day, you can stop playing any game at any time, and that's okay. Like the reasons that you stop playing are entirely up to you. Don't have
Exactly.
time, don't aren't meshing with the players. Maybe one of the players smacks their lips when they're talking it, or they eat as they're playing, and you just want to smash their head in the table. Probably the best idea is to, if it drives you that mad and you don't know them very well, find another group. If it's your
Exactly.
friend that's doing it, call them the fuck out because it's probably annoying other people. It's
Yeah,
it's a
and like
case of what battles do you want to fight?
yeah, like that's kind of where like the whole, overcoming the social fallacies of it comes in, where, if you're playing at the table with friends and your friend is doing something audacious and you just need them to stop, especially growing up, people would just deal with it or complain about it and then not actually do anything about it. But like eventually, like, to go back to your example, like the game that you were in where you were only able to show up every other week, the other players had to deal with you not being there all the time, and then they finally got the proper note of reaching out saying, hey, this isn't working out for us, we're letting you go. That's the proper thing to do in that
And
situation because there was an incompatibility there.
and that's just it. Like, and I will never hold any ill will against them for that. Like I said, like in fact, I said that I was still good friends with the DM. one of the players is still a really good friend of mine. Like there is no ill will in any way, shape, or form on my end, and I know on at least two of them there's no ill will either. And
Yeah.
honestly, the other two I didn't really know them well before. I don't really speak to them anymore because we were never really friends. I don't give a shit if they like me or not.
Exactly.
However,
They,
I'm
they, they
also
acquaintances.
yeah, like I'm all like I was gonna say, I'm almost a 40-year-old man. Like I don't give a shit what people that I don't care about think of me. And I don't
And then
mean that in a I don't care about them. It's that their dislike means less to me. Like if I've offended them or I've annoyed them, fair play. What I did was uncool for the group, and I acknowledge that. However, if I annoyed you, uh, I'd be more contrite
yeah.
because again, like I respect you and I'll ultimately care more about your feelings than I did them.
Yeah, because it's not just an acquaintance you're gaming with; it's an actual friend that you care about.
Exactly.
And then you can pretty much any green flag you can flip to see the red flag equivalent of it. And this is just a great example of like if somebody at the table has whatever habit that is annoying you, like if they're smacking their lips or like drumming their feet all the time or doing something that bothers the entire group, and you guys bring it up to them and they freak out and hold a grudge about it, red flag.
Mm-hmm.
Don't keep them around.
Whereas if the reaction is, "Oh shit, sorry, I didn't even know I was doing that. I'll try and stop."
Yeah. Because like
Yeah.
I am very much a person who has nervous tics. Like I will tap my feet, tap my hands, spin pencils and stuff. Drives my best friend absolutely bonkers whenever we're hanging out because he'll be trying to work on something. I'll just be tapping a pencil against something, and he'll reach over, grab it, and pass me something else that doesn't make as much noise because I'm not conscious I'm doing it,
You're
and
just
we've just
doing it.
kind of and we just kind of have that system in place where I'm not going to be offended that he's pulling it out of my hands and replacing it with something, and he's
No,
not going to be
exactly.
offended that I'm doing it because we've
It's just
accepted
a
that
thing.
this is what we have.
And that's just it. It's a ironically enough, a game built around ultimately being social with other people. Who would have thought that having ways to deal with things that annoy you or may disrupt the game ultimately being resolved in social ways would ever occur?
It's the amount of times that it doesn't seem to occur to people is astonishing, but there you go.
And I think that that goes beyond. I know that it may seem that we're picking on the stereotype of a RPG player, but it really goes beyond the awkward nerd phase of humanity and into just humanity in general, where sometimes people just don't know how to approach things.
Oh yeah, 100%. Like I say this as somebody who very much grew up as the shy introverted nerd. Like it was not nearly as common as The Simpsons made it out to be, but it definitely existed.
100%. Folks, I think we've about reached the end of Anko's topic suggest. I don't know. I'm gonna leave this
Tirade, however you want.
tirade. I'm gonna leave this in. We've about reached the end of where we were intending to be for this episode. Neither one of us know what the next episode is going to look like, so we will hit you with a surprise for that one. But in the meantime, game on.
Game on.
Hey, thanks for watching the previous video from Graphic Policy Television. Just by watching, you help support our site. Thank you so much. Now, if you're watching these videos, you probably care about geeky things like movies, television, comic books, toys, games, video games, you name it. You can go and subscribe right now to our YouTube channel to stay in touch and catch all the new videos, or check out our website at graphicpolicy.com. There's a nice link on this end of the video. But as always, thank you for watching. Keep on rocking and keep it geeky.